I think there must be something wrong with me, Linus. Christmas is coming, but I'm not happy. I don't feel the way I'm supposed to feel. I just don't understand Christmas, I guess.
So maybe it might just be my cold, dead heart, but I don't think there are many subgenres of movies that have produced nearly the amount of trash that Christmas movies have. I'm not just talking about the terrible Hallmark type of Christmas movies that get cranked out by the dozen. There are a whole ton of Christmas movies that people seem to regard as absolute classics that I just really don't understand the appeal of. I think it's probably because they saw them at the right age and they have a nostalgia for them. Like A Christmas Story, for example, I never understood. Like, oh, ha ha ha, his tongue got stuck to the thing, or oh, ha ha, the lamp is shaped like a leg. I mean, maybe at best, a movie like this might be good for a smile one time, but people watch it again and again, year after year, and they make toys of the characters and reproductions of the leg lamp. Some of these movies are kind of considered cinematic classics, too. I mean, Miracle on 34th Street, I guess, is alright, but it's nowhere near the status that people give it. And I like Vincent Minnelli, but honestly, aside from a couple songs that became classics, I kind of hate Meet Me in St. Louis.
Right here in St. Louis.
And I like Frank Capra too, but I think if we're honest, we can admit that It's a Wonderful Life is kind of fucking obnoxious.
Oh, Jesus. Enough already.
I mean, it's not the worst movie in the world, but it's held in such esteem. I think maybe I hate it more than it deserves because it annoys me seeing people heap praise on a movie that I think is mediocre. Or maybe it's just my dead heart again, and I hate seeing other people happy. But I really don't hate every Christmas movie, though. There are a small handful that I really love, and some of them I think are just really great movies. I've been a huge fan of stop-motion animation since I was a little kid, and I loved all the Rankin Bass stuff, like Mad Monster Party and all the rest. So Rudolph was one I always looked forward to every year, back before you could watch everything anytime you wanted, and when you had to wait until December for them to show it on TV again. It still holds up. It has entertaining songs and characters and a lot of fairly clever dialogue. There are a lot of people now who spend too much time trying to look for things that are supposedly problematic in its portrayals of gender and other issues. It was meant to be for children, and it has an intentionally silly tone throughout, but it does also have a lot of intentional messages about fitting in and what society does and doesn't consider acceptable and normal, and it can have entertaining layers as an adult.
Well, for the first year, the Donners did a pretty fair job of hiding Rudolph's nonconformity.
What puts it over the top for me, though, are all the other holiday specials that Rankin Bass did. Back in those days that I was talking about, where you had to wait for the special that you wanted to come on TV again, I would get even more excited for one of the more rare stop-motion holiday specials to surface. Everybody knows Rudolph, but I don't think that most people know that Rankin Bass actually did about 20 specials like this, and over time they constituted what was actually some kind of elaborate, interconnected cinematic universe. They did specials for Easter and New Year's and other things too, but they did a bunch that were centered around Christmas and Santa Claus specifically. The people who want to dig into the messages and subtext in Rudolph might be interested to look through all of these as they get increasingly bizarre and start going into things like the origin story of Santa and tapping into pagan, pre-Christian myths about similar figures. Going into the history of Santa, the character that we know now, and how most of it's a fairly recent invention and put together over the last century, that might be like a whole other interesting video. But for now I'm just going to list Rudolph on here, but also include it with the whole other Rankin Bass stop-motion world, which I think is actually kind of fascinating. A Charlie Brown Christmas, first off, is one of the funniest and most sharply written Peanuts TV specials, and the music and animation are always great, so it has an entertainment factor right off the bat that most of the saccharine holiday specials don't. But it also happens to be a lot deeper than that in its way. I think this might be the only overtly religious Christmas movie on this list, but that's not because I object to religious content. I guess I'm an atheist, or at least an agnostic, but I like a lot of work by Christian artists. It's just that when lecturing and evangelizing become the point for the piece, it usually ruins any subtlety or artistry. Great art is usually better off asking questions rather than trying to provide answers. A lot of good art has Christian themes or Christian messages or a Christian point of view, but when it's specifically marketed as a Christian movie or Christian rock or whatever, that's usually when you can tell that you're going to be in for a piece of crap. They're using that part as a selling point because you wouldn't have any other reason to watch it, and there's a difference between art and propaganda. Because I'm not religious and because I don't like most Christmas movies, that also doesn't mean I have a problem with Christmas. I actually like Christmas itself a lot. In our culture, Christmas is mostly a secular holiday anyway, and as a day for family and friends to get together and exchange gifts, I think it's actually a nice idea. A Charlie Brown Christmas, though, isn't secular at all. In fact, the main point of it is to remind you of what Schulz considers to be the real meaning of Christmas from a Christian point of view, but it's the exact opposite of a pious, sanctimonious, or condescending lecture on the subject. Schulz was a Christian, of course, and it was important to him throughout his whole life, but I still love Peanuts because it's never a simple-minded grift like the things I was talking about where they're marketed specifically for a Christian audience. His values and his worldview are in everything he ever wrote, but he respects his audience enough to let them have their own view and come to their own conclusions. If you learn about Schulz and Peanuts, you'll know how important this special was to him and how closely involved he was in it. And because of that, it comes across as something that's 100% sincere and genuine. I might be an angry old heretic with a dead heart, and also a skeptic as to there being any literal truth in any organized religion, but in A Charlie Brown Christmas, it's done with such earnestness and such love that when the lights dim for Linus's little speech about the true meaning of Christmas, honestly, it can still give me a little chill.
Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
I'm ranking these based on how good they are as Christmas movies, by the way, not necessarily the quality of the filmmaking. Otherwise, I'd probably rank Edward Scissorhands higher because I really love this movie. I never really thought of it as a Christmas movie, though, because it doesn't have the winter wonderland vibe that most Christmas movies aspire to. But I realized it's probably closest of any of these movies to what Christmas actually was for me growing up. Tim Burton grew up in Burbank, and his visions of suburban tract home living are all based very closely on what that was actually like for him. I know because I grew up in Orange County, which is right near Burbank and practically the same. In Southern California, we don't have seasons. Our lawns stay green and most of the trees keep their leaves all through the winter. We'd mark seasons with decorations, and my memories of Christmas are full of fake snow painted on windows and cotton snow stapled on the roofs. This movie, lovingly, if a bit sarcastically, captures that fake polystyrene Christmas that we had in detail. The story of the movie, of course, is more of a retelling of Frankenstein, but Burton always tells Frankenstein from the point of view of the monster, and his desire for love and family and closeness actually make this a very thematically appropriate Christmas movie in that way as well. There are also lots of movies that try very hard to do a sort of naughty or raunchy take on Christmas, and they're straining desperately to be more transgressive than they actually are, or movies that try to act as though they're for a cynic like me who doesn't like Christmas movies. They usually come off as forced and fake and terrible, and they're not any better than straight-faced Christmas movies. Bad Santa's the only one of these that I could think of that actually does it right, probably because Terry Zwigoff is a great director. I can recommend almost any of his other movies, but especially Crumb, which is a masterpiece. None of them will exactly fill you with holiday cheer, though. Bad Santa works because it doesn't pull any punches with the main character, who's a genuinely terrible person, but it's also funny enough and surprising enough that you don't want to stop watching. In the end, he doesn't pull a full Ebenezer Scrooge and become a wonderful person, but he does just enough that you can recognize that for a person as broken as he is, this is probably what it looks like when he's really trying. For an example of why this movie is so much better than other movies trying to be transgressive like it, you could just watch the awful sequel for an example of what not to do, but that movie really isn't worth wasting your time on. A lot of people couldn't quite make head or tails of it when Bob Dylan released a Christmas album, and I'll admit his voice, as it was at the time, on the songs he chose can kind of jump out at you. When the album came out, I worked at a bookstore and I would play it all the time on the store speaker system, to many complaints from customers. I would ignore them and keep playing it because it's Bob Dylan, and even his stuff that you might not like is interesting. I did like it though, even though I also wondered if it was meant to be some kind of joke. But in the end though, I don't think it was meant as a joke at all. It's a completely sincere take on classic standards and entries in the Great American Songbook, for which Dylan has a genuine love. He has such a knowledge of music history that he frequently pulls up details of obscure versions of the songs with different lyrics and orchestration than you might be used to in lesser versions. With Must Be Santa though, he's definitely having a bit of fun, and the video is this bizarre romp with Dylan in a Santa hat and a wig for some reason at a Christmas party that turns into a bit of a drunken riot as his manic barroom polka version of the song plays. I'm allowing short films like the TV specials on this list, by the way, so I'm also going to allow music videos, and this music video, improbably, might just be one of Bob Dylan's best ever. There are a lot of movies that take place at Christmas that aren't necessarily about Christmas, so people might argue about their inclusion on a list like this, and a few of the next entries will fall into that category, but I'll defend the choices when I get there. Gremlins, though, I really think is a full-on Christmas movie. Part of the appeal of this movie when you're a kid is that it's goofy enough to be entertaining, but it's also just dark and violent enough that it can actually be scary and you don't feel like you're being pandered to. I remember that my mom was absolutely horrified by the speech that Kate gives about her dad dressing up as Santa Claus and dying coming down the chimney, which my mom thought almost ruined a movie that she felt was otherwise cute and entertaining.
It was snowing outside. The house was freezing, so I went to try to light up the fire. and that's when I noticed the smell.
It is an absolute what the fuck kind of moment, which is why I love it. For one thing, there's no reason at all for the speech to be in the movie. The fact that Kate doesn't like Christmas isn't something that's really necessary or made use of outside of that one scene, but if they did want to establish that she didn't like Christmas, there are obviously ways they could have done that besides a graphic, lengthy description of a little girl smelling something bad in her chimney, which they then find out is her father in a Santa suit with a broken neck. But although I don't think that particular scene was meant to be funny, it's that kind of what the fuck energy that goes throughout the entire film and makes the pairing of violent puppet hijinks with some genuine Christmas emotion actually work really well. As a kid, I didn't quite get Batman Returns, but as I got older and as superhero movies got more mass-produced and more corporatized, the more I like it. As a kid, I had problems with things like the penguins wearing rocket launchers because I couldn't really wrap my head around how that could be realistically possible. As I grew up, I realized how misguided it is to take a character like Batman and try to make him realistic, and I came to love this film for its surrealism and its sense of humor. Unfortunately, many of the fans today and the corporate filmmaking entities catering to them never got past the place I was at as a little kid where I thought Batman was very serious and I wanted it to all be believable. This isn't a realistic Batman movie, and in a lot of ways it's hardly even a Batman movie at all. You can feel that Tim Burton was much more interested in Penguin and Catwoman, and he focuses the movie on them. I think he likes them better than Batman. Batman is reduced to sort of a bit player in his own movie, which again bothered me as a kid, but now that I'm kind of sick of Batman movies, it's another thing that's gone from being a flaw to an asset. And as much as this is a Penguin and Catwoman movie more than it's a Batman movie, it's also kind of a holiday movie more than it's a superhero movie. The same way that Burton always likes to take kitschy things that he might know from his suburban upbringing and combine them with gothic things from the monster movies he loves. Here you can see that he had a spark of inspiration at the idea of taking traditional American types of Christmas decorations and draping them over these brutalist cityscapes. The idea of Gotham at Christmas became so central to the movie that it's used in several plot points, like the Christmas tree lighting and the mistletoe scene where Batman and Catwoman start out exchanging a kiss and end up exchanging secret identities. Like how in Edward Scissorhands, Burton was telling Frankenstein from the monster's point of view, and his sympathies clearly lied with the monster. Here again, he's telling a story of freaks and monsters that want love and family, and again it ties in perfectly to the Christmas movie aesthetic. From the way Kubrick lights many of the scenes with diffused light from Christmas lights, like how he lit Barry Lyndon with candles, to the film's final scene in a toy store, Eyes Wide Shut is a Christmas movie through and through. It has all the Christmas movie themes of a character going through a life crisis, then going on an episodic adventure that makes him reevaluate his life, and ultimately coming home and realizing that love and his family are the most important things. It would almost be a Hallmark kind of Christmas movie if not for the fact that the episodic adventures he embarks on involve some sort of weird sex cult orgy and a murder mystery. The entire movie, though, is obviously told with a dream logic and not meant to be taken literally, and his inner journey warring between sexual jealousy and fidelity to his wife is of course another version of all those Christmas movies about a character trying to decide what he wants out of life and learning to appreciate what he already has. That the movie deals frankly with the sexual elements and the tug and pull of his relationship with his wife and the fact that it gets so bizarre are exactly what keeps it from getting too on the nose and makes the familiar arc interesting. Plus of course it's Kubrick, so I shouldn't even have to mention how impeccably shot it is and how much subtext is going on in every shot. I guess people still debate whether this is a Christmas movie or a Halloween movie, but it's a Christmas movie. So there, I solved it for you. For one thing, the story takes place starting at the end of Halloween and goes through the preparations for Christmas, but also thematically it's exactly the same archetypal Christmas story that I've been talking about. It's a man having a life crisis, wondering what else in the world is out there, and Christmas makes him realize that he always had what he wanted right there at home. It's also Tim Burton's riff on all those Rankin Bass holiday specials that I talked about before, down to using stop motion, and even doing his version of the Rudolph poem with Zero. Like I was saying before, I loved those specials and was fascinated by stop motion animation as a kid, and then when this movie came out, it took the whole thing to another level. This movie blew my mind. I still remember vividly the first night that I saw it. I built a whole little Halloween land in my bedroom out of cardboard and styrofoam, and I built plasticine puppets of the characters that I liked, which they didn't make action figures of, and I had to build a lot of them myself, because the thing that most people might not realize now is that at the time there really weren't many toys or action figures for this movie. When the movie came out, Disney had no idea what to do with it. They were afraid of it. They thought it was much too dark and too weird for their brand. Originally, it didn't even have the Disney logo at the start of the movie. It said Touchstone instead, because Touchstone was another imprint that they used for off-brand things that they were afraid might damage their family-friendly image. I remember at the time hunting around for the action figures, and the Disney store in my mall only had two. It had two figures. The clerk that worked there told me that they were only sent a single box of toys for the movie. Most of those original figures, which are now very valuable, I got in January after Christmas when Disney dumped unsold toys into outlet stores. The KB Toy Store at my local mall had clearance Nightmare Before Christmas toys piled practically to the ceiling for $2 a piece, and that's how I bought a lot of them. Now, of course, Nightmare Before Christmas merchandise practically keeps Hot Topic in business, and they sell it by the truckload at Disneyland. Disney might have thought the movie was dark and scary and morally questionable, but of course, as soon as they see that they can make a nickel from it, they're immediately on board and try to whore it out as hard as they can. So now, if I say that this is one of my favorite movies, people probably roll their eyes at me for being so into something that they think of as mostly being an apparel logo to peddle shit to your basic middle school goth girl. But in this case, I'm going to be annoying and pull the I liked this band before it was popular card, because in this case, it's absolutely true. I didn't like Nightmare Before Christmas as a fashion accessory because at the time you couldn't even find it on clothes. I liked it because I thought it was an incredible movie, and the craftsmanship of the animation is amazing. The visual style was new and electrifying at the time. It took Disney and the rest of the world a little while to catch up to me, but I'm used to that now. And finally, Muppet Christmas Carol. What can I say about this movie except that it's basically perfect? If you just heard that they were going to do a Muppet version of Charles Dickens' most overtold story, you probably wouldn't think that the result would be Citizen Kane. But something about this just works so incredibly well. The Muppets' brand of humor back then and before they were bought out by Disney and people forgot how to write for them was kid-friendly, but also just sassy and hip and subversive enough that it allows them to also genuinely do the themes of the story, which might seem saccharine or overly sentimental on their own. Tiny Tim's a little crippled boy with a heart of gold and a mouthful of pithy observations about Jesus, and he can become almost a cartoon if you don't play him just right. But if he also happens to be a frog puppet, and this is just presented without an apology, it's an acknowledgement of the heightened nature of the story, and it allows Tiny Tim to be an exaggeration and still feel right. It might seem blasphemous, and I'm not saying this to try to be superior or try to criticize Charles Dickens, because I like Dickens, but this might just be one of the few adaptations that improves on his material. I mean, maybe you think I'm an idiot for singing such high praises of a Muppet movie, but if you haven't seen it for a while, go watch it again. The amazing thing that they do here is that simultaneous to adding jokes about rats and hula skirts, they also manage to be totally true to the spirit and even the storytelling of the book. By having Gonzo as the narrator using a lot of lines directly from the book, they even managed to keep more of Dickens' language and his wit than most adaptations are ever able to. And then Michael Caine gives a genius performance as Scrooge, playing the role absolutely straight. He makes you believe in the reality of the character and gives him emotional complexity, whether he's expressing a genuine terror at his own death or possibly about to get into a fist fight with an angry pig puppet. He also plays a perfect horrible Scrooge in the beginning scenes, and then he guides you along Scrooge's inner journey and painful memories in the middle so that you come to understand him, and in the end he's wonderful as the happy, reformed Scrooge, and it makes it a joy to watch him happy without the transformation ever feeling cheap or unearned. The songs are all great, the jokes are all funny. Moments like Scrooge left alone at school as a child are done sincerely enough that they're genuinely affecting. It's also a beautiful movie to look at with sets and costumes that are straight out of everybody's imagination of what a Dickensian London at Christmas should look like. And all the geniuses that built the Muppets extend their puppetry craft here beyond the Muppets to make other remarkable things like the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. I could go on, but the point is that I just think everything in this movie is great. If you haven't seen it before and you want to, I should also mention that there are at least 3 different versions of the movie in circulation. Originally, Jeffrey Katzenberg forced Brian Henson to cut out the song The Love Is Gone because he felt it was too slow and children, for some reason, couldn't handle 2 serious minutes in a movie that's full of joking puppets. This is from the same brain trust at Disney around the same time that they wanted to cut the song A Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid. Fortunately, they gave in that case. The Love Is Gone isn't as classic of a song as A Part of Your World, but it's a particularly stupid cut because not only does it explain a key part of Scrooge's backstory, the movie happens to end with a reprise of the song with the lyric changed to The Love We Found, only without the version of the song that they cut, the reprise is unmotivated and it doesn't mean as much. Sometimes without explanation in foreign markets or on TV, a version of the movie with the song reinstated will reappear, but other times, as on the film's Blu-ray release, the song is still missing. To further complicate matters, recently in some TV showings there's been another version that has an extra verse added to the Marley's song, and several other bits of footage put back in different places. As far as I know, there hasn't been an explanation for this version either. Disney seems to use the 3 versions just interchangeably, and even though we know which is the director's preferred version, they never really specify which one you're going to get. This is because Disney is a company that exploits and despoils art, and not a creative entity. I just mentioned all that so that you know to check which version of the movie you're going to get if you buy it. But all of that aside, Muppet Christmas Carol is a small miracle of a movie. It takes what's probably the most overtold, archetypal Christmas story there is, which could otherwise be everything that's obnoxious in a Christmas movie, and it just does it so well that it's enough to make even my cold, dead heart feel something sort of like the Christmas spirit.